the Zoom stuff.
I know.
And then, yeah, we had it moved down to the corner. That's what it was. It doesn't matter. It doesn't show up on
Yeah, that's a different system. There we go. Right. All right.
All right, great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
You're welcome. I don't remember where I met Shandy. It was either at the Rogue Fly Shop, which I substitute clerk there once in a while, because I've known the guy that owns the shop since he was about that big. And when I finally retired for the second time, I told him I'd pitch in and work an occasional Saturday or once in a while. So I moonlight there, and I get a little better deal on stuff once in a while too, like I need more stuff. But anyway, just a little bit about me. So I grew up in Southern California in a farming community. Half my family was ranchers. The other half were policemen, and there was an odd accountant thrown in the mix there. One side of the family had a place in Mexico. The other side had a place at the Colorado River. And then my dad kept a boat at either Corona del Mar, Long Beach, or Santa Monica, or wherever the fish were at for that particular time. So I was a lucky kid. I got to fish a lot. Left there, went to Eastern Washington to go to school, studied fisheries, got a call from the family. They needed some help with the ranch. So I moved to Bishop, California, where I lived for 35 years, and got to fish Crowley and Bridgeport and the Owens River and the Walker Rivers. Spent 30 some years fishing Pyramid Lake. And then in 05, 04, bought a ranch property in Grants Pass. Was doing both places. I was a policeman in Bishop for 30 years while I was ranching. So I retired from that about, 15 years ago, I guess. I'm almost 70. Anyway, we sold the ranching operation in Bishop. We sold the ranching operation in Grants Pass, and now I'm more or less free as a bird. Can do whatever I want. Did a lot of subcontractor work for California Department of Fish and Game when I was down there. A lot of it was big game stuff. Some of it was fisheries stuff. And then when I moved to Grants Pass, I've been doing fisheries stuff. They're mostly anadromous fish. Fish counts, fish trapping, red counts, habitat restoration stuff. Former president of the Rogue Fly Fishers, longtime board member. Did a lot of stuff with them, the Southern Oregon Fly Fishers, the Umpqua Valley Fly Fishers, and the only gig I really have now is I'm a board member on the Rogue River Watershed Council, which pretty much takes in that whole 6,000 square miles of the Rogue Valley. And we do mostly cooperative stuff with private landowners on private streams that ODFW doesn't get involved in. And we go in and we help people upgrade their irrigation systems, do stream bed restoration, and try to focus on nursery streams for anadromous fish, steelhead salmon, Pacific lampreys. I'm not a guide, not a biologist. I'm just kind of a student of the game. I've been fishing the Klamath Basin since the 80s, probably. Very similar in some respects to Pyramid Lake, or at least the legacy of it. And yeah, it's a great place. I don't know. I know some of you guys have been. Beth, you've been there, right? Anybody else been down to the basin and fished either Upper Klamath or Agency or the Wood or Williamson, any of those rivers? Anyway, I spent a lot of time over there, and feel free to butt in, ask questions, whatever you want. I don't care. We can just have a conversation. So I want to talk a little bit now. My little advancing thing doesn't want to work, I guess.
Huh. It was working.
It was working. Well, now this isn't working.
Oh, no.
Our standard deviation.
Hang on. I might have to just do it.
We might have.
Oh, it says
Oh, there
click
you
to
go.
join audio.
What's that?
Click to join audio.
No.
Are the other folks getting audio? Do you know?
Yeah, they're getting audio.
Okay.
Yes.
So anyway, just a little bit of history. So back about 12, 13,000 years ago, at the end of the last epoch of the Pleistocene, the North American ice sheets came down into the country. This would be about 30 miles north of Seattle. That's about how far down it came. There was so much water tied up in these ice sheets that if you wanted to go fishing off, let's say, the coast at Brookings, you'd have to go across dry land for 100 miles to get to the ocean. Because all that water was tied up north. Well, when that stuff started to, hey, it worked. When that stuff started to melt, it left all these pluvial lakes, most of which you're going to be familiar with. Lake Bonneville, Lake Lahontan, which is where Pyramid Lake is today, Walker Lake, some of the other lakes in that area, American Falls Reservoir, Lake Spokane, Lake Missoula. This one in particular is the one we're going to talk about today. That's Lake Modoc. So when those things went away, this is what you ended up. You had Lake Bonneville at 19,000 square miles, big lake, right? Lake Lahontan, 8,500, and Lake Modoc, 1,100 square miles. Lake Modoc is essentially where Klamath Falls is today. And we'll see a little better picture of that. So when those things melted, this meteorite was found right out of West Lynn, Oregon. That thing landed on the ice sheet in British Columbia. It traveled down the Columbia River Gorge, which was cut by the draining of Lake Spokane and Lake Missoula. It got caught up in an eddy at West Lynn before it made it to the ocean. And then when the ice melted, that thing plopped onto the ground and was found there in 1902. And it's back east somewhere in a museum now. There's a replica up there in West Lynn. Actually, it's the largest meteorite found in North America to date. Anyway, that's how much water was getting moved around and pushed around and went all over the place. So that's Lake Modoc. What happened here, at that time, the Klamath River did not exist. There was a lava flow at Lava Beds National Monument, or in that area, a little less than 10,000 years ago. All this system used to drain down into where Truckee Lake is, the lower Klamath Basin, and it just basically evaporated at that point. Well, when the lava flow cut off the route for that water to go, it sought the lowest point. Well, that was at Keno. It was at then that it cut the Klamath River to the ocean. So it wasn't, the Klamath River didn't exist prior to 10,000 years ago. The elevation of the lake at its fullest was about 100 feet above where Klamath Falls is today. So all of that was inundated by water. And you had a bunch of these guys around. And I don't know where they went, but I'm pretty sure that has, no, you can't see it. It just says, well, so much for the unicorns, but now all carnivores are confined to sea deck. So that's might be where some, I don't know. Anyway, so I just say splendid about these fish over there and about that area. And part of the reason is it has something to do with the respect that I have for the Pyramid Lake situation. Those fish in the pyramid system evolved at the same period of time that these fish evolved. They're cutthroats, obviously. These are red bands, but still they evolved out of the Pleistocene. And they were endemic to that region and they were isolated. These fish are the same way, and they didn't really know they were isolated until just a couple of years ago, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But they are awesome. I have a tremendous amount of respect for them. It's kind of like steelhead. They've just survived the test of time and a million different things that weren't going to work in their favor. So anyway, the big lake, there's two lakes over there, Upper Klamath and Agency, and it's actually one big lake. They're separated by a canal, and they call them two different things. But these are just some of the information about the lake, the elevations, the average elevation. This mandated minimum came from a court settlement to protect the endangered rough fish that are in the lake. So the people that control the water are not supposed to let the lake get below the 4137 mark.
When was that mandated?
I don't remember.
Not recent.
No, I think it was back in the 80s.
Okay.
So there's 4,000 square miles of watershed over there almost. All of the Sprague, the Shewakan, the Wood, the Williamson, Fort Klamath, all of that drains down into the basin, including the lower basin. And there's only about 20% of the marshland there now that there was at the turn of the century. A lot of that was drained and turned into either farmland or pasture land. So there's some unique things about it. It's hyper-eutrophic, eutrophic being it's nutrient rich. Hypereutrophic means it's extremely nutrient rich. So the watershed dumps a lot of phosphorus and nitrogen into the system. A lot of people want to blame the cows. They might be partially to blame, but even when Lewis and Clark first came through this region, the original route that was cut by Kit Carson and his crew went by the lake. The other group didn't want to go that way because it stunk. It was hypereutrophic at that time. So although the cows may have something to do with it, it probably doesn't have a whole lot to do with it. Now, and that situation's a lot better than it used to be. So the cyanobacterial algae bloom, this is blue-green algae. You guys have probably heard about that stuff, right? This is a biggie, the sea shasta parasite. Maybe you recall seeing fish kills in the Klamath River. That's sea shasta. Sea shasta broods and reproduces in the reservoirs below Upper Klamath, although it's in Upper Klamath. But when it goes down through Copco 1 and 2 and Iron Gate, those are just heat sinks. And that water in there just turns into this toxic stew, as does Upper Klamath Lake. It does it as well, but it gets worse as you go downstream. At some point, if the conditions are right, whatever fish are in the river below all that stuff, it'll kill them. The incredible part is the fish that are here in the lake, they grew up with this. It doesn't kill them. So that's kind of neat. But in the summertime, the pH goes sky high. When the algae blooms die off, it drives the oxygen out. That's why all these fish go to the thermal refuges in the summertime. It's not the water temperature. Most people think it's the water temperature. It's not. It's this right here, which results in this. And if they get caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, it'll kill a bunch of fish over there, even though they're fairly resistant to those environmental things. Just a map of the lake. It's a pretty shallow lake, except for down in here. Most of the stuff we fish, all the way from Thomason's down to Odessa, you know, it's 6, 7, 8, 5 feet deep, not very deep. There's some deeper stuff here that we fish in the springtime, this time of year. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Algae bloom from space. Taken a couple years ago. This is Agency Lake up here. It's not as affected normally. This is Pelican Bay, where Rocky Point is. Klamath Falls is right down here. This is the Wood River, or the Williamson River, I'm sorry. The wood's up here off the screen.
So that all just gets, it suffocates, no oxygen.
Well, you mean the main lake?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a brew in the summertime.
Oh, wow. I thought it was like Crater Lake. I thought it was deep, cold.
The average depth is like 7 feet.
Wow.
If I go from Pelican to Thomason's Creek, which is, Thomason's Creek is right here. If I go out of Pelican, go around here, I never see water deeper than 8 feet, ever, except for in the bay right here. If I go across here to Eagle Ridge, I don't see anything deeper than 6 feet until I get real close to the ridge. It's just really shallow. So it gets really warm. The algae blooms. It absorbs the sunlight, so it gets warmer again. It's this kind of chain reaction of bad things. But the fish grew up there, so they know that. And they, you know, as a rule, they get out of there when they have to get out of there, and they survive it. But they've been doing it for a long time. Link River is down at the end of the south end of the lake. That's where the Klamath River goes out. Doesn't toot too much. It does actually have a good fish ladder. It only raises the lake about 6 feet from what it would be otherwise. But what it does is it will hold water back, so you won't have situations like that, which happened a few times, where the lake got low enough that it didn't flow out the outflow. And that was way back. There's probably a date on there, 1918.
Yeah.
1918. Yep. So this is the wetland on the northwest corner of the lake. This is Pelicans around the corner here. This is Eagle Ridge. This is Bear Island. This is 4 Mile Canal. This is actually Agency Lake here. This is Crystal Creek. Runs all the way up Malone Springs. You can actually go from here over to the Wood River almost, if you know where you're going and there's enough water in the basin. About 85% of the Pacific flyway birds either stop, rest, or live in the wintertime in the Klamath Basin. It's a pretty incredible number. So it's a vital place for wildlife. There's 4 rough fish that live in the lake, the Klamath large scale, Klamath small scale suckers, and then Lost River and short nose suckers, which are both on the endangered species list. You will occasionally catch those when you're trout fishing. And they get pretty big. The Lost River suckers can get up to about 15 pounds, something like that. And at first it seems like you might have trout on there, but anyway, but that's what we want. We want the red bins. So what are they? Well, they're rainbow trout. They haven't had fluvial life history, which means they live in the lake, but they spawn in the rivers. Either the Wood, the Sprague, or the Williamson, by and large, Recreation Creek, Crystal Creek, there's other places. The prevailing wisdom until just a couple years ago was that these fish evolved from the Klamath River steelhead. The DNA study was completed a couple years ago by a couple of kids that work for ODFW. They compared the DNA of these fish to the Klamath River steelhead. There is no integration between the two. These fish evolved independent of the Klamath River steelhead, believe it or not. It was a big surprise to almost everybody. So they are genetically unique. One other thing is they're piscivorous at 1 year old, which means they eat fish. So a typical scenario is you got a couple adult fish that go up Crooked Creek and they spawn. They lay their eggs, the alevins hatch. Those guys stay in the river until the next year's adults come and spawn. They stay there until they can eat the young of the next year's spawners. That's unheard of with rainbow trout. This is the only place ever that that's been documented with rainbow trout. Brown trout, yeah. Brook trout, yeah. Rainbow trout typically are not that piscivorous. They eat bugs and stuff more than they eat minnows and stuff. But these guys they're brutal. You don't, it's eat or be eaten kind of thing. So anyway, they stay in that stream for a little over a year. They're about 5 to 7 inches long when they out migrate back into either agency or Upper Klamath Lake or the marsh, depending where they're coming from. They're pretty resistant to the sea Shasta parasite, which we talked about. They're also resistant to the blue-green algae. For about 70 years, they tried to plant trout into Upper Klamath Lake. Every time they did it, it was a failure. The fish, they couldn't survive. It was just, they didn't grow up there. They didn't become intolerant to the things that are harmful to them there, and it just kills them. They typically spawn at 3 years old for the first time, and they're typically 20 inches long at 3 years, which is a really fast growth rate. The lake is just a chock full buffet of you name it. Scuds, leeches, all kinds of bugs, lots and lots of minnows, dragonflies, damsels, all kinds of stuff. For a long time, they couldn't figure out why some of them got so big until they started putting RFID chips into the fish that came into the Crooked Creek hatchery. Crooked Creek hatchery is at the north end of Agency Lake. They don't use that hatchery to put fish back into Klamath Lake. They put fish other places where they want to control invasive species of fish, like shiners or tui chubs, or because they're fish eaters. But the fish naturally spawned in Crooked Creek, so they built the hatchery there. So they started chipping them. They put RFID chips in their nose. When they come back the next year, they read every nose of every fish, and if it was a previously chipped fish, it'll tell them what fish that is. Well, there was a 32-inch hen a couple years ago. That's probably more than that, 6 or 7 years ago. She came back for the 8th time. It's unheard of how long-lived they are. Most rainbow trout, even in ideal circumstances, will spawn 2 or 3 times. That's about it. That was her 8th trip back to the hatchery. So she was 11 years old. Just incredible. That's where they came up with this 37-inch fish that weighed 30 pounds. Was at the Crooked Creek. You guys have any questions yet?
I do.
Yes.
Is it catch and release only?
No. Agency Lake, yes.
So these fish that are able to get through the toxins and the what is it? The parasite? The
Yeah.
parasite and toxins,
Yeah,
eating, is that transferable to, is it like a zoonotic?
no,
No,
you wouldn't want to eat it raw.
no,
No, I don't think you'd want to eat it at all, frankly.
yeah, I
I
mean.
don't know
there's
why
a big-
anybody would want to eat a rainbow trout that lives in water that's 75 degrees for
Mm.
part of the.
I mean, I personally wouldn't, but do people,
There, I
Harvest
see
them?
people keep fish occasionally, yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose they're eating them, I don't think I would want to eat them.
no, I mean, dogs can't even go in that water, so.
Anyway, so. They're great fish, they're awesome, this was last summer, a friend of mine had a hosted trip, these guys bought them in an auction that I donated. And, we caught, they wanted to go to Agency at Sunrise and strip along the reeds and. I hadn't been there yet last year and we put in a place called Petrick Canal and I'll show that to you. We went down Petrick, went into the lake. We got there at 5:30 and there was 11 boats at the mouth of the river. I'm like, I've never seen 11 boats on this whole lake at one time ever. Well, we caught 3 or 4 fish there. We went up to a place called the levee, caught a couple there, went back down to the mouth of the wood, caught another fish. And I said, hey, Pelican's been fishing good. Let's go over there. We went over there. They caught 17 fish that afternoon over in Pelican. I mean, it was an incredible day. That's a
What
lot.
time of year was that?
July. We'll cover that a little bit here as we go. So spawners, the Williamson River,
Hmm.
the Wood River, Spring Creek. There's some awesome spawning, the Lower Sprague. Some awesome spawning opportunities for these fish. I used to fish the Williamson a lot. I don't fish it anymore because I feel bad for the fish. Because a lot of years the fish are in there by June, they're in there till October. And they're just seeing boat after boat after, you'll catch fish with half their jaw missing. I mean, there's days, there's 20 guide boats going in at the public launch at the confluence with the Sprague. They're just getting their butts handed to them all summer. I'm not judging, I just don't want to be a part of that anymore. So I don't fish the Williamson anymore. I fish the Wood some, but not the Williamson. So that's about the size of those fish when they out migrate to the lake. And that's your job, just find the best parts. It's easy. That's all you gotta do. And the sooner we all figure that out, then it makes it easier for us to keep. Anyway, so where do these guys live? So when I say main lakes, I'm talking about Upper Klamath and Agency. They're in the main lakes October through June, basically, or a good part of that period of time. Then from July through February, they actually have documented spawning over there 12 months out of the year. Believe it or not, it's really a weird situation. It's a really diverse life history. It's an insurance policy for survival. Most fish don't have that broad of a spectrum of spawning dates. The thermal refuges, so the places where the water's cold and clean is where they go when the lake gets toxic. So they'll go to the Williamson River, the Wood River, Pelican Bay, some of these other places, which I think I have on a slide here. That's a Pelican Bay fish. This is the kid that owns the fly shop there, and that's past them. That's probably 14, 15 pounds, something like that. Nice, it's a nice fish. So the springtime. Oh, it's a great place to watch birds, guys. There's a million birds right there. It's just incredible. And these guys are there too. This little shithead. So we're sitting on 4 Mile Creek comes down from 4 Mile Lake into an area called Harriman Springs. And in the old days, when the lake actually drained that way and came down into the lake, they put kokanee and mackinaws in 4 Mile. And they said, there was a big argument about this. Maybe we shouldn't do that because in theory, those fish could end up going down into the Klamath Basin. And then we're introducing fish down there that aren't supposed to be there. Well, it happened. Well, the Max couldn't lift, but the kokanee did. And you'll still today catch a few kokanee along the Rocky Point area, Recreation Creek, once in a while you'll catch a coke. In November, sometimes up around Harriman, you can see some pretty good size, like 5-6 pound kokanee. Look like little sockeye salmon that are in there spawning. So this day, we're sitting in 4 Mile Creek we're fishing. We had caught a couple fish. And about from here to the wall in front of us is a row of weeds, and then the marsh goes back that way, it's grass and stuff. And there's a million mud hens clucking around. And my buddy says, "Hey, an otter." We look upstream, there's an otter coming downstream, and it's a big otter. It looked like a freaking seal. Anyways, he got closer, he went underwater, and we just sat there and thought, well, now the fishing's going to heck, right? Well, we were indicator fishing, so we're looking at our bobbers out there. All of a sudden, the water right in front of us just explodes. Well, that otter came up, not this otter, but another otter, came up under one of those mud hens and grabbed it. And of course, a whole boatload of mud hens went flying off and running off, clucking and clattering, making all kinds of noise. And the otter's like this, and the mud hens flapping, and swam off into the marsh with that mud hen in his mouth. Anyway, I wrote a president's message that that month the otters really do like poultry. So
It's good to know that something will eat mud hens.
oh god, that was pretty spectacular. So those are just depths. We talked about depths a little bit, all this stuff being pretty shallow. This says 20 feet. I don't think that's right, but it could be. Maybe when I go like this or something. But in the spring, back to what we were talking about, a lot of the fish hang here in Shoalwater Bay, this side of Eagle Ridge. We launch at this boat ramp right here at the Eagle Ridge Park. And this is almost exclusively a cast and strip thing. You can fish like balance leeches under an indicator if you want. If you got some wind, things are moving around and you find enough fish, you're literally casting and bouncing your fly off the rocks and then stripping back. And you can only see about this far through the water. It's always really turbid. I used to use really flashy flies. Not so much anymore. I figured out, and this went back to pyramid a little bit, when we used to fish down there in the dark. The best flies to use in the dark were the flies that moved water. So something with a big chunk of rabbit, something that just moved water. You're out there, it's pitch black. You can't see your hand in front of your face, but those fish can find your fly. And I mean, there's no moon, there's nothing. It's like, how the hell are they? Well, they feel it, they sense it, they hear it, they whatever, and they grab it. So I kind of got away from the flash fly type patterns and went to more of a full pattern that would move a lot of water, and it works better. So a lot of the stuff I fish now is like 4-inch long bunny leeches or 5-inch long bunny leeches, maybe with a trailer hook, that kind of thing. Like,
what weight rods and lines do you use mostly?
for stripping, I use an 8, and the reason I use an 8 is because sometimes the wind blows a lot. I don't want to be fighting with a 5-weight or a 6-weight trying to throw a 4-inch long rabbit that's, you know, chuck full of water. I want to be able to pick up, do it. And you're not casting, most of the time you're just casting from here to the wall. You're pretty close to the bank usually. Those fish are just cruising there looking for blue chubs or tui chubs in the rocks around the ridge. Sometimes you can find them out here, and they're real showy sometimes when they're active. If you get over there and there's nothing showing, you're not seeing any fish working at all, and it's like glass, have a beer. I don't know, because the odds are that's going to be more fun. But they're usually showy if they're around. You know, if you have an old style Humminbird handheld with a side finder, really handy to have. They don't make them anymore. I see them on eBay still all the time. 120 models, what you want, or a 130 black and white. You don't want the colors. They eat batteries. I mean, they work okay, but they eat batteries. The black and white ones don't eat batteries. Anyway, we spend a lot of time. And what I do is there's a, I think I have a slide. Well, there's the ridge. It drops off pretty fast. Shoalwater's shallower. Sometimes we'll get into fish way down here. Sometimes the water quality down by the marsh is a little bit better. You just want to be really careful. If you do launch here, you go around here and you know there's going to be a strong northwest wind that day, pay attention, because you won't notice much wind here, but when you have to go back around the corner, the water piles up right there off the end of that thing. And I mean, I'm not a sissy, but I mean, you know, you'll get lake swell that big because it's coming across, you know, 10 or 12 miles of lake before it gets there. That's the ramp. That's Shoalwater Bay, looking west, kind of northwest actually. So at Link River, there's a gauge, and there's a temperature monitor on that gauge. So if you go to the USGS site for river flows, gauge heights. All you gotta do is click on the temperature button, reload it, and it'll give you the temperature. When that gets to 50 degrees in the springtime, that's when I start going to Eagle Ridge. If the water's below 50, I don't go. Because that 50 is kind of that temperature when those fish really start thinking about going crazy. And they'll stay down there until the water's about 68. It depends a little bit on the toxicity. I checked it this morning, it was 66 degrees down there this morning. And I know there's fish coming into the thermal refuges now. Usually Father's Day is about the time they really start showing up. Some years, last year they were like 3 weeks late. But we had a really wet, cool spring. They were still catching fish down here at Eagle Ridge almost around the 1st of July, which is not, usually they're out of there long before that. But the Link River gauge, 50 degrees, that's what this was December 1st, so it was 33 degrees. And that lake freezes over every year, or most years. So another pelican bay. Yeah, that's a pelican bay fish. Nice little fish. So what are they on down there? That's what they're eating in the springtime. Tuies, blue chubs, fathead minnows. There's a couple different sculpins in the lake. They're really hard on the minnows. And when those fish first come out of the main lake into the thermal refuges, holy mackerel, hold on to your rod, because they are like supercharged. Once they've been in the thermal refuges for 2 or 3 weeks, they slow down quite a bit. But when they first come out, they've been chasing these minnows and stuff around for 3 months, 2 months. I mean, they're just turbocharged. I mean, you'll get a fish that'll just reel, I mean, your fly line will be gone in 5 seconds. Well, that doesn't happen in August after they've been in the cold water for a while. But when they first come out of the bay, man, they're just smoking. I mean, I got spooled last year on a fish that jumped. I saw that it was hooked in the mouth. It was probably a 16, 17 pound fish. I had 4X on there. I just grabbed the reel and stopped it. And so I couldn't get him to turn around. He was heading back out. We were out by the main lake. And he said, no, I ain't going in here. I'm going back out there. Most of them don't go that far, but that one did. Pretty fun. Yeah.
So what is the little fish that hangs out underneath the Rocky Point Resort? It's like brown with black stripes that are going like that.
Oh, those are yellow perch.
Yellow perch?
Yeah. There's a ton of yellow perch in the marsh. You'll catch them occasionally. You don't see them out in the main body of the lake very much because that's not a good place to live.
Is that a good pattern right there around Rocky Point when they're hanging out under the dock?
It can be there. Where it's really effective is where Crystal Creek comes into Pelican Bay.
Okay.
Crystal Creek is loaded with yellow perch. And when they're on the feet, I don't know that it matters a whole lot. I mean, I think it matters sometimes. I don't have anything that looks particularly like a yellow perch. I have a lot of stuff that looks like, minnows per se. But yeah, it could be. And there's big fish. Well, you've fished over there. There's a bunch of big fish that hang right there around the creeks. These guys are good to watch, because I'll tell you, this is the stuff I used to kind of fish with down in the turbid water that I don't fish with that much anymore. So in the spring, big, bite, and bold. Doesn't have to be that flashy as long as it's just got a big profile. You can use indicators in the springtime off the ridge down there. You just want to make sure there's fish around. Dangling, we have caught fish in that trough between Bear Island and the ridge and 25 feet of water. We're using a type 6 or a type 7 line. What we're doing is we're using like a balance leech pattern, let's say. Hooking a pair of hemostats on it, dropping it all the way down to the bottom. Pull it up about 2 or 3 feet, hold that, and then take a piece of white athletic tape, just a little bitty one, and put it right at your stripping guide, your first stripping guide. So you know that spot, and have your rod tip on the water. If there's a bunch of fish down there, let's say at 20 feet, I'm not going to indicator fish for them probably at 20 feet, especially in that turbid water. If it was crystal clear, I might. And I don't want to strip and wait for it to. So what I'll do is I'll mark my line, maybe at 17, 18 feet. I'll just cast it out there and let it drop down, and then I'll pull it back up until that white tape gets to my first stripper, and I'll just sit there and hold it on the tip of the rod on the water. And I might do some of this. And just wait. And they will literally just rip the rod right out of your hand. I mean, they don't care. They when they finally figure it out, it's there and they see it. It's like,
It's theirs.
yeah, they're gonna take it. So that's a pretty fun way to fish, because if you have one of the boats I fish in a lot has an iPilot trolling motor. So it's got a GPS lock, and you can just sit there with and it holds you in one spot, even if the wind's blowing hard.
So the flies you're tying now, let's say you're tying some rabbit flies, with a little bigger head and whatnot. What's some of the favorite colors in there?
Chartreuse, white, blue, and white. I think the contrast is more often important than the color. I think white though, yellow, chartreuse.
Do they ever hit the darker flies like
Sometimes.
purple or black? Or
Yep,
dark
sometimes.
olive?
Yep. Olive, I don't have much.
I like to go there with target flies.
I don't have much faith.
You got
So
some
there's
of
there's one that I strip with. And I strip with that on a floating line.
Yeah.
Because you're casting in the water you're casting to the rocks. You don't want it to, you want it to sink a little bit, but those fish are in there, they're looking for those minnows, and if this is the rock, I mean, those minnows are right here in this first.
Yes.
And a lot of times your grab is gonna come within the first 10 strips,
How long leaders do you usually
like
use?
7 feet.
Oh, okay.
Well, the water, you can't see that far through the water. So,
And 4X normally?
not down there, I use 2,
Now we go.
only because the water's so turbid. There's no reason, no, you get smoked. If you're stripping and one's going that way and sees it and grabs it and you're on 4X, you're just gonna come a little. And they have huge teeth. They have really big teeth. Don't put your hand in your mouth.
What's the bottom like where, I mean, are you gonna get hung up on?
Well, there's rocks along that edge. Yeah, if you let it drop down into the rocks. In the rocky places, there is. Other places, it's just marl or might be weeds, depending on where you're at. That's the launch at Pelican at Rocky Point. It's a good launch, small parking lot. Get there early, or you won't have any place to park. If you don't want to launch there, go to Harriman Springs Resort. It's $5 to launch. It's private. Nobody's going to break into your car there. The ramp sucks bad, but it's usable. And you take 4 Mile Creek out to the lake from there. We'll show you a picture of that in a second. So anyway, what do we do in the summer? Well, we fish, and you don't want it to look like this. You don't want that slick business. You want some chop. So these are the thermal refuges, not all of them, but a lot of them. Pelican Bay, which is at Rocky Point, Recreation Creek, which is at Rocky Point, Crystal Creek, which is in Pelican Bay, Harriman Springs, which is in Pelican Bay, Odessa, which is just south of there, I'll show you on a map. Fish Banks is out of the bay a little bit. Thomason Creek is up the lake from the bay. Wood River, 4 Mile Slough, the Williamson. Pelican, that's the North Shore. Rocky Point is over here in that background where you see those buildings and stuff. So that's Pelican during the fires. That's what you want. You want that chop. I don't care if you're stripping or indicator. If you're indicator fishing, that's awesome. If you're using leeches and stuff, because at least it's moving around.
And we were talking about, actually, Beth and Bill and I were talking about this a couple days ago about smoke. That haze,
Mhm.
like fish really like getting on the bite during that.
Well, it's shady. They don't like sunlight. So anything you can do to reduce the sunlight is helpful. I mean, the smoke sucks, but
Yeah, I mean, we don't want it, but
no. And the other thing is, even though that's bouncing around out there, I don't let if I'm indicator fishing, I don't let it sit there for very long. I'll move just a pole like that. Every 5 seconds. I'll just move it like that. And then I'll roll it out there again, 50 feet or 60 feet or whatever.
Do you use carbonates at all?
Especially earlier in the season and in a couple in particular spots. Pheasant tails, chronomids. When you get late in the year, especially along Recreation Creek where most of the big springs are, that area just gets hammered. I'll go to a 3 weight with 6X. And I'll throw size 20 Prince nymphs, size 20 irresistibles on like a 12-foot leader. And I will just, with a hover line, and I will just slowly walk it in. And, or it's maybe even a size 20 Rainbow Warrior, something really, those fish just get hit a bunch. For those of you guys that know Benson, I know Beth knows Benson. That's what he focuses all his attention, or most of his attention, right there on the springs. I don't fish the springs that much. I kind of have the same mentality there as I do the Williamson. Those fish are kind of getting, I don't want to say they're getting tortured. And Benson handles fish really well, but there's a lot of people that don't handle fish really well, and that's not good. So anyway, I kind of tend to stay away from those main springs. The good thing about there is though, you can do it in a float tube, you can do it in a pontoon, you can do it on a surfboard. You don't have,
Is it non-motorized?
pardon me?
They're non-motorized.
No, you can have a motor, but I'm just saying any floating device that you can get out there with, it's fairly safe along Recreation Creek, along the cabins there. You're probably not going to get in trouble. This is Recreation Creek. This is where all the houses and stuff are. You can see the springs, all these dark spots. That's the actual Rocky Point. This is Crystal Creek. And when it confluences with Recreation Creek, upstream, it's Crystal Creek. The only reason that's important is Recreation Creek's open all year. Crystal Creek is the general trout season. So if you're over there in March fishing the bay, you don't want to go up into Crystal Creek fishing. You don't want to go past this confluence and go upstream and go fishing either, because it's closed. This is Harriman. This is where 4 Mile comes down the mouth.
Where's
This-
the red green buoy on that?
There's a red and green buoy here.
Right there.
Then there's channel markers all the way out to here, and there's another red and green buoy out here. This is Fish Banks. See that little cut right there? That's some cold water that comes in there in the outside. There's 2 or 3 of those out here. You can see here where the lake water is trying to push in, and the cold water in the bays.
Are they aquifers?
They're springs. They're coming right out of the ground. Yeah, and there's other places where they seep out of the marsh. You can kind of see it on here, and this is helpful for you guys if you do go over there. So you have water coming in here from 4 Mile, from Harriman Springs. There's a giant spring right out the picture here. You have water coming in this way. This water, when it comes in, confluences right there. You can kind of see it. And then for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, but it cuts across here and then there's a trough over here. And you can barely see that trough. See where it's just a little bit deeper through there? Yep. That's where those fish like to be. This area here, we call it the canoe trail. There's some canoe trail signs along there. You can do this loop in a canoe or a paddleboard or whatever. A lot of people really enjoy doing that stuff. Those fish like it right there through there. This is Pelican Cut. I don't know what it's there for, but that's what it's called. It weeds up really, really early in the season. That's just the view looking south from Rocky Point. So that's Pelican Bay looking out that way. You're looking south from this spot. Another little guy. Another bird. So that's Harriman Springs. It's right here. And you can launch here and you go straight down 4 Mile. The Harriman Spring is actually here. There's some other springs up in here too also, but the primary spring is right here. So when I go over there early in the season, let's say right now, I may launch here or I may launch at Rocky Point, the launch, which is right there. Either way, I kind of have this little tag team thing. I mean, I just have a routine. I'll go here first. If I don't like it here, this big flat right here, kind of where that boat's at. This big flat right here holds a lot of fish, as long as there's enough water in the lake. And that won't be a problem this year. There's a red and white buoy here, anywhere off that red and white buoy out in this direction or up this way. I don't know why the fish like it in there so much, but they do. This is farther up Recreation Creek. So we're looking at, it's not on there, but it's up into here quite a ways. Great place in the summer. You can get a lot of fish up in there just cruising along and just stripping along, just cast to the bank and move to the next spot. That's in the bay. So that's Thomas and Fish Banks, just another, there is a launch at Odessa campground. If you're in a boat, it's not that far to run over here to Odessa. There's a bunch of springs right here. You dump into here. I've caught a lot of fish in there. The fish will stay there in Odessa. So later we talked about smaller. Water's pretty clear in there most of the time. You know, most of the season, if I'm fishing balance leeches, I'll fish 4X. If I'm fishing chronomids or little nymphs, I'll fish 5 most of the time. When it gets really tough, I'll go to 6 with a 3 weight. And then you just hope you don't hook the 20-pound fish because you're not going to land it. Or the odds are you're not going to land it. So chronomids, leeches, stuff, little stuff like that. Damsels, I haven't done that much good on. The hares here and the calabatus, they can work pretty good. Balance leeches. This is called a fuzzy. I've just been using this pattern the last couple of years, and I've been using it almost everywhere. It's UV micro chenille and a marabou tail and a copper bead. And I don't know what it is about it. And it's brown. Any color is good as long as it's brown. The fish are just, I don't care if it's diamond, east. It has been just, I mean, it looks kind of, that's a shitty picture, but it looks kind of crappy. But that has been an unbelievably popular, for me anyway.
UV micro chenille brown,
Yep.
and then marabou brown, then you
Yep.
have some,
There's a couple of pieces of flash tied in the tail. This is a root beer colored bead. It doesn't show that way in here. That brown up there is another really good pattern. That was kind of my go-to forever. And it still is to some extent, but sometimes the, you know, the maroon works good, and this kind of more of a bruiser pattern works good too, but my first place is brown usually when not always,
ever use.
but
Well, I'm gonna change.
really clean fish. A lot of fish will catch over there will have copepods. You guys know what copepods are? They're just a skin parasite. They're just a little worm that lives under the skin. One of those pictures before showed some. Once in a while you catch these fish that are really, really clean. Strip and flies, carry specials. That black and maroon to strip has been really effective. This we call a peachy. It's just olive with a little bit of peach colored or salmon colored dubbing right behind the head there. I don't hardly ever use weighted stripping flies. I usually use a line that gets me to where I want to go. Most people strip too fast. Almost everybody strips too fast, believe it or not. Once in a while, I mean, the fish really want you stripping, but a lot of times, man, it's just like, yep, really slow.
I have a question.
Yes,
So when you said you fish sometimes with a 3-way, or let's say a 4-way, and you're using a long leader with 5X or even 6, how big are the trout that you target when you're fishing like that?
20
About
pounds. 20
those
pounds.
big trout?
You don't know what you're gonna get. I mean, the average, if you're fishing on the springs all the time, especially later in the year, the average fish is probably gonna be about 20 inches. If you're out in the bay or away from that area that gets a lot of pressure, the average fish is probably more like 23 inches. I've caught 30 inchers out there and on 5X.
Really?
Yeah, but you're in a boat, you're not in around a bunch of big weeds.
Yeah.
I've lost big fish. I know I've lost a few fish over 20 pounds
I love it.
because they got me into something that I couldn't get them out of. In the fall, when the minnows are all hatching, you'll see this all the time. These guys are herding minnows and the trout will just follow them around. So if you see a bunch of pelicans working in an area for an extended period of time, go over there.
Yeah.
Because the fish see that too. And the fish, after a little while, once these minnows have been in the system for a month or two, the fish know when the pelicans are doing that, there's something there. So the fish, and they hear all that commotion and stuff. Sometimes you'll have just a big old water red bands under there chasing minnows that the pelicans are herding.
It's like,
Yeah, so
I just want to comment on the size of the fish. Last year I caught one fish under 15 inches the entire season.
Yeah, you don't catch.
Everything, I've had days where I didn't catch a thing under 20 inches. And everything I caught was between 20 and 24 inches. 15 fish between 20 and 24 inches
Wow, man.
in an afternoon.
I mean, you just,
That makes you go back.
I like what you said.
the only reason I use a three-way is to protect the tippet.
Yeah.
I want something that's soft, that's gonna.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm using 6X,
I bought myself a fiberglass rod to try. To
well,
protect my
that
tippet.
works too.
Because when you were talking about these fish, you know, running you down to the spool, I was thinking, Jesus, I got all my bonefish rods are hanging out in my garage.
Oh,
You know, with 300 yards of backing, you know, on an 8 or 9 weight, it would be perfect for that.
I indicator fish with a 6, a 10-foot 4/6 weight. I have one set up with leeches and one set up with either nymphs or chironomids. On the chironomid rig, I go 4X to the top fly, 5X to the bottom. On the leech rig, I go 4X usually. Later in the year, I might go to 5. On the stripping flies where I'm gonna be casting and it's windy, that's why I use an 8.
Yeah.
On the strippers,
Yeah, that's.
at least with the big flies at Eagle
That's-
Ridge. In the
yeah.
bay up here, in the summer, I use a 6 weight to
Yeah,
strip.
that's pretty diversified fishing, man, but you
Yeah.
know, it's a big spectrum here.
Yeah, so anyway, Agency Lake, that's just the lake at the upper end of the system.
Mhm.
It's very similar in nature as far as what the fish do. You can catch fish over there like in March and April. They're just really hard to find. As the water gets warmer and warmer, they'll start to coalesce around the mouth of the wood and the levee off the Wood River up towards the north end. This would be the levee here. This is the Wood River. It splits into 3 parts. Do not go down this part of your boat. You can launch at Petrick and go all the way down this canal and you can go all the way down the river to the lake. As long as you don't have a big heavy boat with a big motor. And there's enough water. So that was an agency fish last June. I mean, that's like an 18-pound red band. That is a pig. I mean, she's just fatter than fat. That was, I think, a 9 or 10 fish day. That was off the mouth of the wood. So the places you can launch over there is at Petrick Park. This is no longer available. And then down here is a place called Hensel. You can launch down there. You just have to motor back up. There's nothing down here to fish for. Maybe around Memorial Day, you'll have fish along this edge, but slowly but surely they all move their way up this way because that's where the colder water is. So that's Petrick. Here's the boat ramp. This is Modoc Road. That's the boat ramp. You see all this green? Well, that's weeds. And sometimes it can get real, as it gets later in the year, it gets almost impossible to get down to here. Once you get to here, you can get to the Wood River, as long as there's not a bar there, which sometimes there is. But, and then you can go down this way.
Do brown trout come down into the lake
I've caught 2 in 20 years. And both of them I caught,
from the wood?
well, you can't see it here. This is what we call the levee, because there's a road that goes across here. Both the browns I caught were right here off this levee. There's a lot of brown trout in the Wood River.
Yeah.
They can't tolerate the lake,
Oh, cause the,
so they'll make little forays out. It's kind of like Mono Lake in California. That's a salt lake. There are some of the browns now that will make their way down Rush Creek and edge out into that briny water. But they don't stay out there very long because they can't put up with it and they go back. But there's a lot of food out there. So they'll go up there and they'll go out there and tough it out for a little while. And I think that's probably what the browns do. But, you know, out of, gosh, I don't know, several hundreds of fish that I've caught in there just catching 2 brown. Both of them were about 10 inches long. They weren't very big. That's a Petrick ramp. That's the one where you got to weed whack all the way down there. That's the Hensel ramp. That's looking towards Rocky Point from the northeast looking southwest.
What would you say the distance is from that boat ramp up to where you like to fish?
Oh.
Out the river?
3 miles, 4 miles.
3 months, yeah.
It's not that far.
I mean, do they have a speed limit on
No.
that for boats?
No speed limit. Those are copal pots. See all these little imperfections? This was June 4th or 5th or something. We had a 54 fish day that day. Oh, at the mouth of the wood. Nobody out there, just me and my buddy Keith. And like 10 of them were over 10 pounds. That's like a 7 or 8 pound fish probably. I can't remember. And it was shitty out. I mean, it was cold.
Will the copepods bother swimmers?
I'm sorry, Don.
Will the copepods bother people who are swimming?
No. They don't bother the fish. I mean, they don't hurt the fish. They just live off them and they're just not very pretty. So that's when somebody's in my spot. So get out of my spot. Just real quick, boats and gear. We kind of already talked about that. Anywhere in the recreation creek area, you can float whatever you want and fish out of it. Float tubes, pontoons, big boats, little boats. There's really nothing to, it's real protected in there. Unless you get way out in the bay or something. I mean, as long as you're half smart, you're not gonna get yourself in trouble. Agency fish a couple years ago. Nice fish. And the rods and stuff, we talked about that. I don't know if you got, ODFW does a podcast periodically. Episode 55 is just on Klamath Lake red bands. There's a lot of really good information there. Bill Tenniswood, a good friend of mine, is the ODFW biologist in Klamath Falls. About half of that podcast is Bill talking about the fish. The other half is the two kids that worked on the project that identified the DNA discrepancies between the steelhead and the red bands there in the lake.
That is a good podcast. I
Yeah,
enjoyed
it's a
it.
great podcast. Anyway, that's a particular good one if you're interested in the fish over there. Episode 55. So just go do it, wait. Because if you don't, you'll be disappointed. There's a nice little fish. Really clean.
They're all huge.
That fish weighed 16.8. So weighed it in the net, held it up, took a picture.
So they're not related to the steelhead and the Klamath.
Nope.
So Mackenzie, Deschutes, both have red bands. Where
Different
else?
fish. Oh. The McLeod.
Klamath.
So the McLeod River in California, the most vastly distributed fish around the world came from McLeod Hatchery before Shasta Dam was put in. All the rainbows in South America all came from the McLeod River. Those are red bands. They're just a separate subset of
Of rainbows.
rainbow trout. But genetically, they're different than the Klamath Lake fish. And there's fish in the basin over there that are genetically different than the lake fish. So you have the fluvial fish, which are the lake dwellers that spawn in the rivers. You have the fluvial fish, which live in the rivers that spawn in the streams. They're genetically a little bit different than the lake fish. They die if you put them in the lake. They wouldn't
So the
survive.
lake ones are like zombie fish, basically.
They're like
because
zombie
they've
fish, exactly.
Acclimated to all
Yeah.
this stuff.
Yep. They're kind of like the pyramid lake fish. If you put just about anything in Pyramid Lake, it's gonna croak. If it didn't evolve in that environment. So it just so happened that when Pyramid Lake got extirpated back in the late 30s, when there was no more spawning runs up the Truckee River, the lake had been commercially fished for years, and enough time went by that the old fish died. So the tribe said, okay, we need to reestablish the fishery. Well, north of Pyramid Lake was Summit Lake. Summit Lake, from a chemistry standpoint, was very similar to Pyramid Lake, except for those fish had been compromised with rainbow trout. But they were still partly Lahontan cutthroats. So they built a hatchery at Sutcliffe, started putting those fish back in the lake, reestablished the fishery. And then there was some thought that they would always, there was a good chance that they would find an original Lahontan Lake, Pyramid Lake Lahontan cutthroat. The reason they felt that way was the tribe sold thousands and thousands of fish, live fish, and eggs all across the country. Well, lo and behold, Dr. Robert Benke, who is Dr. Trout in the world of trout, he had some grad students out trying to find the original strain of Bonneville cutthroats. And they went up this little stream on Pilot Peak in Nevada. And lo and behold, they found some trout in there. And took them back to the lab at the University of Utah. Becky had, I think, 27 chains of DNA on cutthroat trout. These didn't match anything he had. He's like, what the hell is this? Well, nobody knew. Well, then Mary Peacock was a geneticist at the University of Nevada, Reno. And she developed a practice by which you could take tissue from museum mounted fish and extract DNA. That was in 1977, I believe. Those fish were originally found in 71. Well, they had some fish there in the museum at UNR that they knew was caught in the, they knew they were caught in the 20s before the lake had been extirpated. So they knew those were the original Lahontan cutthroat trout that were in Pyramid Lake. So she ran DNA. Well, she knew Benke had a chain of DNA from some cutthroats that didn't match anything he had. Well, bingo, those little fish in Pilot Creek were Lahontan cutthroats. So the National Fish and Wildlife Service entered into a MOU agreement with the rancher there. They built a harvesting facility, basically, where they would strip eggs and milk from the males from these little creek fish. They haul them back to Gardnerville, Nevada, where they spent, I think, 7 years building a brood stock program there. And in 2002, I think it was, I'd have to look at my notes, they reintroduced the original strain of Pyramid Lake fish back into the lake at about 400,000 a season. And a lot of them had FLIR tags. They're, well, it's a dorsal tag. It's got a serial number on it. And if you caught one, you could write that number down. Call Tim Miller with the Fish and Wildlife Service. He'd call you back and say, well, and a perfect example, I caught a 28-inch hen in the fall one year. I don't remember what year it was. Beautiful fish, really clean, really bright, looked like a winter steelhead. No color at all. Probably 9 pounds, maybe 10, really heavy, stocky fish. I called him, left the message. He called me back a couple days later. He says, well, we released that fish at Shot Dog, which is a location there on the lake, 36 months, almost to the day before you caught it. It was 6 inches long and 30 miles from where I caught it. Not that the 30 miles is significant, but that fish grew 24 inches, 23 inches in 30 months. And so that was kind of cool. And over the years, I caught a lot of, most of the time I didn't have anything to write with, so I couldn't write down the number on the dorsal tag, but
Norman Steele asked what was in Man Lake, you know?
Lahontan's. Yep. Man Lake was part of the original Lake Lahontan, as was Honey Lake, Walker Lake in California, Mono Lake in California. Lake Winnemucca used to be attached to all that. I mean, there was.
So they're all super high salinity alkaline.
Yep. But what happened was when Derby Dam was built in I can't remember. Derby Dam was built on the Truckee River. And another piece of infrastructure called the Newberry Canal was built. Well, the Newberry Canal transported water from the Truckee River to Fallon and to Lahontan Reservoir. Well, for years, they diverted almost all the Truckee River water out of the river down the Newlands Canal. Newland was a state senator. They named it after him. It was his brainchild. Well, the good thing was they watered 600,000 acres of farmland in Fallon that previously hadn't been able to be watered. Okay, that's great. Except there was no water going down the Truckee River. So the Truckee River silted up, 1. 2, a bar was created at the mouth of the Truckee at the lake. And for 10 years, fish couldn't get from the lake into the river. And so whatever damage had been done prior to that was pretty much finished off by the Newlands project. And the fish went bye-bye. I started fishing it in the late 70s when hardly anybody fished it. You weren't getting these 20-some pound fish like you get today, but part of the reason you weren't, there was a lot more fish in the lake then. A 50 fish day was a nothing burger. That wasn't that uncommon to have a 50 fish day. If you got a 10-pounder, they had a 10-pound club then. It was hard to get into the 10-pound club back in the 70s and early 80s. And if you were lucky, you got into the 10-pound club. Well, then as time went on and it became more popular, more and more people started fishing. When National Fish and Wildlife Service reintroduced the original fish in there, the tribe cut back the number of Summit Lake fish that were going into the lake. And for years, they probably either over harvested or over harassed the fish in the lake. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I sat in a float tube off of Warrior Point and watched jiggers pulling fish from 120 feet down and just ripping them off and throwing them, and they're just turning belly. They have the bends. They're just like catching a rockfish in 200 feet of ocean water. You can't do that. It'll kill them.
Their heads explode.
Or you got to, pardon me?
So their heads basically.
Well, yeah, you either got to deflate them or you got to take your time to bring them up. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of fish like that every year. It's like, holy mackerel, you guys, this is killing me. I mean, it's a magical place, just like this is.
Or did you bring Tommy Lee Jones in here to analyze this so we won't remember?
So, yeah. For those of you, I've been trying to find a real neuralizer, because this is like my favorite place to go, and I really like talking about it, but I don't want anybody else going. So,
Look at the light.
so, yeah, I want to be able to stand up here and say, now look at the light, and I want to flash everybody, and then you can say, this was great.
Remember anything.
Anyway, yeah, that's why that's there. Because I don't want you to remember any of this shit.
So they're taking out some of the dams on the Klamath River, right?
They're taking them all out except for Link River and Keno.
So keep the basin, the lakes here at proper level.
Well, what it will do, it's mostly gonna help everything downstream of Upper Klamath Lake. Because what happens when it leaves the lake, there's a little lake called Lake Uana. The Link River is a half a mile long. I think it's one of the shortest identified rivers in the US. It's not very long. And then from there, it goes from the Link River down to Keno Dam. That's called Lake Uana. Both those structures have good functioning fish ladders. But Copco 1, Copco 2, Iron Gate, and JC Boyle do not have fish ladders. Well, once all those come out, which will be pretty quick, Copco 1 or 2, I don't remember which one, comes out this coming winter. They're already doing the road stuff. In fact, it's this outfit. Res is the name of the company. You won't have 3 reservoirs there that do nothing but just cook. They hold that water. I mean, the water in those, it gets to 90 degrees. There's some unbelievable trout fishing in what's called the Keno stretch of the Klamath River. It's a little hard to get to. It's kind of mountain goatish. I've been in there twice as all in my lifetime. It's unreal. It's pocket water stuff. It's Euro nymphing type of stuff. There's like 25-inch rainbows in there. It's just unbelievable how blue ribbon it is. But hardly anybody goes in there, one, because it's a little bit tough. But I think what's going to happen, me personally, and again, I'm not an expert. I kind of know a little bit, but I guess we lost our little. The way they're supposed to.
There we go.
They need to redistribute gravels and rocks and sands and sediment and all this stuff. So every time you put these big dams in that stop the natural process of all these things happening, it hurts the fisheries. And with the Klamath, it's unique in the sense that those dams are doing absolutely nothing now. They don't serve an irrigation purpose. And Iron Gate was the only one that generated power. And it's been decommissioned, and Pacific Corp doesn't want to relicense it. And they can't anyway, because one, it's too expensive to bring it up to the current water quality standards. One, it's just not worth the trouble. So they're going to take those things out. And I think what you're going to see is that whole upper system. One, you're going to open up 400 and some miles of tributary spawning habitat that got lost. That's a lot of spawning habitat. And you're going to get cold water through the system. The sea Shasta parasite can't exist in cooler water. It perishes. So all those fish kills that happen every year in the Klamath River, theoretically, those should go away. They shouldn't happen.
So those big salmon kills, so that's from the.
Sea Shasta. Yeah, if the temperature and the bloom and all that happens at just the right time when those fish are all in there, it wipes them out.
So how far is Happy Camp to these areas that you're talking, like up to the?
So Happy Camp is 50 miles south or down, I don't know how many river miles, I think road miles, it's 50 miles downstream of Interstate 5.
Right,
And then from Interstate 5 up to Iron Gate, which is the first dam, or the lowest dam in the system. I don't know, as the crow flies, it's probably 8 or 9 miles.
okay.
When's Iron Gate coming out?
I think it's the last one to go.
That'll be
The winter of 25 or something,
25.
maybe 25, I don't remember. The schedule of all this has gotten screwed up a few times for a host of reasons, but and some other things that have happened that'll make a big difference here. And this might be of interest to you guys too. I don't want to beleaguer this and keep everybody here forever. And I can't remember their names. There was 2 geneticists at UC Davis that both of them are gone from there now. And I just read where the gal's working now, but I can't remember where. They identified the allele in Chinook salmon that determined whether they were spring or fall Chinook. They also determined whether a steelhead was a winter or a summer steelhead. The reason that was important was Springer runs on the West Coast have been going away, where fall Chinook numbers have been good and in some places going up. What they found out was every time you breed a spring Chinook to a fall Chinook, you end up with a fall Chinook. Every time. In the good old days before dams, in the springtime, there was lots and lots of water. Springers would come up the rivers, and because there was a lot of water, they could get as far up the system as they could go. In the fall, that water wasn't there, so there was physical barriers to keep the fall fish from getting to the late spring fish. So the early fall fish couldn't get to the late spring fish. So when we put dams in, we held back all that water so we could irrigate all summer, right? So we kept flows elevated through the summertime, whether it be the Klamath or the Rogue or wherever. Well, now your springers that are tardy are just getting there about the same time the early fall fish are getting there. So now you got springers and fall fish breeding. All the offspring is fall fish. So that's what it was, man that caused artificial flow regimes in these rivers that has caused the demise of the springers. They didn't figure that out until about 2 years ago. And now, like the Rogue, I think the 20th or 21st of September, they cut the flows to nothing. Because they don't want those fall fish getting up to whatever springers are still there that haven't spawned yet.
At least they figure it
So that
out.
should-
Better late than never.
Yeah. And there's only one spot on the Klamath system where springers still exist. And that's the Scott River. So they're hoping to be able to take those fish and rehabilitate the springers and see what happens.
Did
Pardon
it
me?
flush of the Klamath?
Yeah, who knows? So, anyway. That's all I got, man. Unless you got
That's all.
there's some cards here. If you guys ever have a foot, just take one if you need something, or you can get a hold of Shandy. She can call me if I still talk to her after this trip.
You saw the 2-hour drive home? Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I'll tell you guys, if anyone wants to go fishing with me at Rocky Point, I'll be there every other week in July and August, and if you wanna send me an email and find out when I'm there and sit next to me and watch what I do. Cool.
Every other week.
Every other week.
Nice.
I already got it booked.